Okay, so here we are coming up at the Kam Wah Chung and Company building right here in John Day, Oregon.
It all starts with gold being discovered in Canyon City in 1862. At that point, it was a small little town, but overnight grew to be a really large town. In 1881, by that point, there was a large Chinatown in Canyon City, and there was a small Chinatown here. Three Chinese gentlemen started a store here, and they named it Kam Wah Chung. Kam Wah Chung means Golden Chinese Outpost. And then in 1881, Chinatown and Canyon City burned down overnight. It's not proven, but it was considered to be arson at the time.
I was going to say, funny thing.
Yeah. Well, since it was started in 4 different places in town. After it was all said and done, the city said, we don't want you building back here, but you can go down to John Day. In 1888, 2 gentlemen met here. They're 20 years old, or their early 20s. They're Lung An and Ying He. Lung An was a merchant. The other gentleman was Ying He, and Ying He was a Chinese doctor. They formed a partnership, and they bought Kam Wah Chung from the previous owners. Here's a picture in 1915, just to give you an idea of where Chinatown is compared to downtown John Day. So we're way out here, but the majority of John Day is over here. And the reason they set up the Chinese here was this was a floodplain between Canyon City or Canyon Creek that runs right over there and John Day. So this used to flood regularly over here. You know, what better place to put the Chinese, right? So with that, we're going to walk in and see what was in there. We'll let you take a moment to look around. So one of the things I like to point out before I close the door, excuse me. There were times when there would be some violence outside, and so they would have to stay in here, shut everything up. These metal doors are like bifolds that can go across the door here. They put tin on here. This is flattened out like these oil cans up here. These were flattened out and put on here. And these are actually put for fire prevention because they don't want them starting a fire. But you can also see what happened when some people got a little rowdy and shot through anyway. So, the boiler, the famous boiler. So I'd like to start with the doctor first and tell you about him. His name was Ying He, and he was called a doctor of pulsology. So rather than acupuncture or whatever, he would read your pulse. And so there were 12 pulses on each wrist and 3 on your ankle for a total of 27. He could read all 27 of those. The pulses aren't just your heart, which we all think of, like you check your pulse, but they're pulses for all your organs and your body systems. So he could tell if your chi was blocked in your kidneys, or if your liver was stagnant, or whatever. So that's how he was able to do that. And then he would then go to his apothecary over here, and he put together an herbal formula. So that was how he treated people. Now, in this apothecary, this was actually the bars here where when it was an assay office before it was a Chinese store. So that's what these bars are here. But you can see he had patented Chinese medicine. And these are all little doses, usually 1 dose per bottle. So if you needed 10 doses, you'd get a box with 10 of these in them. And these are still used today. A lot of times we'll have visitors that come here and say, oh, I have some of those. This is animal parts, so he was known to put animal parts in his formulas as well. Just recently I had somebody that came in and said that there's a flattened gecko over there, and that's used for indigestion or upset stomachs.
That was for car insurance.
What's that?
That was for car insurance.
Good one. Okay, so there's over 500 Chinese herbs in here. Not too long ago, a couple years ago, we had a delegation of Chinese doctors and herbalists. They had gone all the way along the Western Hemisphere. They found 2 places in England, in London, that had complete collections of Chinese herbs of this era. They came here. This was their last stop. Some of them didn't plan on coming here because it was out in the middle of nowhere, and what could this possibly have? But when they came here, when they saw what was here, it's listed as the largest collection of Chinese herbs in the Western Hemisphere. So, but in this bottle here, there was a rattlesnake, and they poured rice wine over it, and it would be used as a vitality, kind of a Red Bull of, the day. There's also a box in here. I believe it's this one. It says dragon bones on it. And what it is actually are dinosaur bones that they would have got from the dinosaur digs. And it was ground into a powder. It's used in various things in Chinese medicine, among others. It's actually used for mental illness. So he would give you a package with a various mixture. We have his formulas. You're not an herbalist, but you might be interested. There is online from OCOM came down here and they translated about 10% of his formulas. We have pages. He kept copies of all of his formulas. One of them has 83 ingredients in it. There are other ones that have over 100 ingredients in it. So his instructions are on this little white pad here, and it says empty package into blank number of beer bottles. So he knew that they'd all have beer bottles, but they may not have quarts or measuring cups. So that's an interesting way to send your...
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Is the American Brewing Company Baker, Oregon from 48? Is that really this right here, this banner?
Oh, yeah.
Wow, it's cool.
Well, before 1948.
Wow.
Yeah, at least. So this is Doc Hayes' realm. We do know that he was a lover of music. In his bedroom, we found 3378 records of Chinese opera. He also used to listen to music on here, as well as the war effort when there was the Chinese Republican Army. This is a picture of the generals and Chiang Kai-shek. And they were supporters. They actually sent money to them on a regular basis. So over here is his bedroom, and you can see in his bedroom how he kind of lived. Very simple man. He had used cleavers for protection. There's stories of some people who came in here in the middle of the night and snuck in here, and he all of a sudden they heard going past their head, and the cleaver stuck in the wall over here. So they took off and let people know, and that was one of the reasons they didn't have a lot of theft in here. So we also had a Victrola in here, and he used to listen to the records. There's the speaker for it, and we have the arm over here with the needle on it. But the actual box itself was taken when they opened this up and started going through the inventory of this place. A lot of things walked off, and that was one of them. So perhaps one day we might get it back. Anyway, the real story of Ing He is the box under his bed there. So when they came in here, they opened up that box, and inside the box they found $23,000 of uncashed checks, mostly from the 20s and 30s. So this would have been the time of, depression. And when asked at the time, why aren't you cashing these checks? He said, they need it worse than I do. So if he needed money, he would take a couple out, he'd sign them off, he'd take them down to the bank, and he'd cash them. But $23,000 in 1948 is about $300,000 in today's dollars. It's a very generous man, and the community knew that. So again, the real story with these two gentlemen is that they went from a total Chinese clientele and they assimilated into the Western culture.
Did one of them own auto dealership here too?
So we're going to go to him now. So I kind of like voice. So Ing He, kind of quiet, soft-spoken, was a jokester, laughed a lot. He said he wouldn't touch anything with paper because he didn't want to get paper cuts on his fingers because his fingers were his tools that he used. So as he was that way, I often bring up the yin yang sign. Then I say on one side you have Ing He, on the other is Lung An. And together they formed this partnership that lasts for over 60 years. So Lung An had the store. Now this store, what you see on the shelves is from 1940. The oldest, the newest things on the shelf would be from 1940. After he passed away, Ing He never restocked in here. So what's left is what Lung An had on the shelves. So at this point too, you're talking about the Western culture only, the local ranchers and mill guys working the mill. He would be able to get bulk objects, so you can see in his storeroom back there, crates of things. So the ranchers would come in here and they'd get their crate of soap for the year, or whatever it was that he could do. They were both practitioners of kind of a Confucianism and Taoism belief. And so that's why you have the altars here. And there's this one altar right there. And you can see those oranges were left there in 1948. So they're still there. The altar would have a candle burning 24/7. And then this altar back here actually came from the temple. When the temple was burning down, they went in to save what they could and put this temple up here. And these are the lanterns from the temple. And you can see there's 2 oranges back there as well. So besides having the store, Lung also printed his own lottery tickets. He eventually owned 3 racehorses that he took on a racehorse course from down the coast of Oregon into California. He also had property here. He had part in a mill. He owned houses in town. He then had, as you brought up, he had the first car dealership east of the Cascades. He was said to be able to look at a dollar and turn it into 2. So that's the kind of guy he was. He was quite a character. He wore Western style clothes. He went into town on most nights and came home late. And had a couple girlfriends here in town. So he was out and about. Whereas Inge was a bit more reserved and stayed around here. But when the Chinese were here, and this was a predominantly Chinese area, in the evenings they'd pull this red table out and they'd sit around the table and they'd gamble and they'd smoke and they'd drink. And I like to imagine with the fact that we have an erhu in here, which is a 2-stringed violin, and Chinese violins, as well as this is a zizi. It's a trumpet-like instrument that I like to imagine that there was somebody playing this music in the corner as these guys were hanging out here, just like you'd see in a country western bar today. So when they came in here and they started taking things off, they found a trap door in the storage room, and under the door they wound up finding about 98 bottles of this Kentucky whiskey. So during the Prohibition, he was a bootlegger on top of everything else. So these bottles now, we have 33 of them in our possession. The rest of them walked away when they opened it up originally. And they are now worth, each one of them, $10,000 a piece. Yeah, these are epigrams. They've all been translated. We have them in a binder up in the interpretive center. Those that can be translated. The thing is that it is old style Cantonese, so even people who can read Cantonese have a hard time translating these. But I actually had a gentleman come in here the other day, and he was looking at this one here. He was from China, and he could read some Chinese. And he said on this one it says February 6, 1931, which would have been Chinese New Year's that year. And it's a reference to the altar, to leave your offerings on the altar of, he said, it says fruit, money, and oil. But a lot of them some of them are just store signs that say like, all herbs are fresh. Other ones say things like, come in as a stranger, leave as a friend. I mean, they're proverbs and things like that. Now, see, the thing that's interesting is we're also talking, he was living here during the Chinese Exclusion Act, when they can't own anything. And yet, somehow or another, this guy owns all of these things. If you have any questions in here, no further questions, we're going to walk into the other room here. So this would be for the Chinese miners, and they'd come in here and they'd need a place to clean up and get something to eat and have a place to sleep. They were coming out of the hills, and so they would come in here for 5 cents. They could get a place to sleep and something to eat. Now, we also know that you could get 4 to a bed. So you would sleep head to toe, so head to toe, head to toe, head. So among other things, he had a catalog business, so he'd get a percentage of the sales he made by selling Western style clothing to the miners. So in the kitchen, we can see there's an altar behind the stove, and that's the kitchen altar. And on that one, there's a pomegranate that's been there since 1948. Okay? So, one of the things I like to point out here is this square on the floor. It seems kind of, unnecessary, but what it is actually a post that goes down to the ground. So they could come in here and they could chop their wood on that. But you can see, and one thing I like to point out on the shelf up here, that's just kind of fun. So we know that Coke bottle, you've seen that probably. So, but this is it predates that green one, that Coca-Cola bottle. One of the things I like to point out in here is this photograph that says to Lou Long of John Day, Oregon, a staunch friend and loyal supporter of the First National Bank of Portland, Oregon. And the reason they have that is that during the Depression, he actually lent the bank money to stay open. So he was a wealthy man, had about 7 bank accounts across Oregon, and when he died, his estate was valued at about $1.5 million.